Arcane. we're in for a ride.
All you're saying to me is set up for MMOs, which I think is very funny.
Yes.
It's like, we got
Yes.
void creatures, we got Darken, we got undead, we got...
Yep.
There's so many different enemies, it sounds very MMO-ish. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tell Me About, the show where I don't know nothing, and hopefully I have friends who can tell me a little bit more about stuff that I'm interested in. Today is an episode that I'm very excited about because it really spawned from my interest in the Arcane series and the world that they crafted over at Riot and all the different things that eventually lead you to the League, which I am not very good at. And so my knowledge of that world and that space is very limited. But thankfully, I've got the guy here who can help me navigate all the things I don't understand. Necrit, thank you for joining me.
Hello there, this is me. I'm the lore guy. I am known as the lore master, even though I hate that because I know there are people who are way better at this than me. But I will say yes. If you want to know the story of any of the 170 champions who are currently in the game of League of Legends, I probably know it all.
I love the lore and world building they're doing. I think it's fantastic. However, I absolutely do not understand how that translates into League of Legends, the game. I understand that they are doing a new thing where Arcane is going to influence the game now. Now, I need to figure out how it all connects. Like, how does the Rift connect to Arcane? What does the Arcane even mean in that sense, right? So many questions. Where do we start, I guess, is the question. Now that the series is over, at least the first potential series, and we got a follow-up trailer season hype reel that brought some characters back, introduced new characters to people out there who may never have seen them before or never played the game. Where do you think we're going with this?
So, this is a loaded question with an absolutely hilarious twist, because the way that Arcane is connected to the Summoner's Rift is it's not. The Summoner's Rift, as in the game that you play in League, is essentially just a made-up scenario where it's a what if these people actually met on a battlefield. When it comes to the story, besides just the characters having voice lines against each other, which are usually in a canonical way, and a what if scenario, like what if two characters actually met, what would they actually say to each other? That's the only thing that you really get from the story when it comes to the game itself. Outside of that, it is completely disconnected, and a hilarious fact is that when Arcane came out, it got a lot of people hyped, everyone downloaded the game, and according to the stats, no one stuck around, and everyone left, because League is League, and League is not really Arcane.
That is one of the things I was talking about when they mention very good video game properties and expanded universe things, right? Fallout, for example, when you saw Fallout, you were like, dude, I want to play Fallout. And when you played it, you were like, yeah, this is Fallout. Or Edge Runners, you're like, oh yeah, I want to play Cyberpunk. When it came to Arcane, I love Arcane. Had zero interest. I've already played League, and I was like, that's not gonna be that. I'm not gonna be hanging around in, Piltover with like some cool it's not gonna happen. And so I was really excited when they were thinking about expanding the universe and bringing other games in. And then they kind of just said no and stopped doing that. And I was kind of disappointed they gave up on that. But yeah, I completely understand. So what you're saying is the Summoner's Rift, anyone who... I'm trying to think of how to word this. Anyone who saw the end of Arcane and saw Jason Victor get, blipped out of existence, the thought shouldn't be, oh, they're in the Rift and it's all gonna lead to that. The thought is, no, they dead.
So are you...
Whoa, okay.
So are you asking, is Jason Victor dead? Is that your question right now?
What I'm asking is, if it's not connected at all, online, when people are like, yo, maybe what's happening is at the end of all these series, that we're gonna see Jason Victor alive and they're in Summoner's Rift, and that's how it's all gonna connect to the game. And you're saying, nah, dude, that's not happening.
No, there's no, absolutely not. Because, Mbessa died. Mbessa is in League of Legends. I do not believe there's gonna be, a necromancer, coming to the Mbessa, raising her just so she can be at the ultimatum at the very end. No, that's completely disconnected. But, that is one of the big reasons why everyone is hyped around about the Riot MMO. Because, the world is massive. Like, so the way you want to tackle this universe is that you actually go to universe.leagueoflegends.com, and that is essentially a massive library of all the lore of all the champions that is just canon. Like, this is what Arcane was based on. Now, the thing is, yes, Arcane took some of the stories and they were like, we can do something better with them. So they like, shoved them into the corner and like retcon some stuff just to make a better thing for a show. Which makes sense because they started building this universe 9 years ago together with the show. And as the universe progressed, it went slightly different direction compared to where Arcane ended up, so like eventually they had to collapse both of those. And Arcane was just the cooler version, so Arcane was picked to be canon. But like, this is basically your library, where you have all the canon lore, and the coolest part, the coolest way to explore this universe is at the top. There is a button where if you click on it, it opens up a map, and on that map, you can go wild. The first thing in the middle is Piltover and Zaun, that's where Arcane is, and then like from that place, you just have a look at different regions. You go to the north, there is Noxus, where the story is heading now, which now can take me to how is this actually connected to League of Legends? In a simple way, Riot acknowledged the fact that League is not amazing at storytelling. In fact, it is garbage. It is so garbage, the players would play literally anything else, including TFT, even though TFT has nothing to do with the lore besides the characters. So what they are trying to do, they have a new system where every year League will have 3 seasons that are it's themed after something cool from the universe. The first season is based on Noxus, and it is canonically continuing the events of what happened in Piltover. Now, because Riot knows that League is awful at telling stories, they are trying to use tools within League to push the story forward. For example, right now, if you log into League of Legends, you will actually find a comic. That comic tells the story of Mordekaiser, which is basically a story about LeBlanc. Now, LeBlanc is a character who appeared in Arcane. It's a little shadowy figure that talked to Mel, and you can learn how this shadowy figure banished basically the god of death in Noxus. And now Mel is heading into that place because we know that from cinematic. So like now Riot is connecting different media so that they can tell their stories. So basically, after Arcane came out, now there was a new cinematic that introduces you to a new season in League of Legends. That cinematic is tied to a comic that is inside League of Legends, and now they will start rolling this forward using different media around the internet that are not necessarily the game itself.
Going back to the map, I love it, and all it did was show me how big Runeterra is, to the point where not only size, but also history. It isn't just, here's the map, here's some cool stuff. It's also thousands of years ago, the ancient civilization that was in the desert that did this. There's a lot to it. And I'm curious because as we get into, watching Mel's journey from the end of Arcane into the new content and seeing Noxus and seeing new characters, and they all have backgrounds and motivations and stories. And you see in the new video, it's like, whoa, who's that badass assassin? Again, I'm aware who they are. I'm just saying, if you're new to this, you're coming from Arcane, like, who's that new assassin? Is that a spider lady? Wait a minute. Who's that Jesse and James style character who are like, oh, we're up to no good? Like, who are these people? And they all have backstories, but then those backstories, as you said, connect to the idea of this, long history of, well, there was a god of death, and that god of death dead. And where did that come from? And what was that about? And that connects to something else. And you were talking about connections between comics and media and that kind of stuff. And now that's also in this story. There's other connections and other things. Do you think they're saying, hey, pull on those, discover it yourself? Or will we learn more about that? Will we deep dive potentially past things? So maybe there's a spin-off show that is not after the events of Arcane, but maybe 1,000 years before. Would there be things like that? How do you think this all connects and works together? Or is it just not really that important to what they're doing right now?
So I believe at this point it is a about, I'm gonna be guessing, about 5 or 6 years since the last big retcon that happened to the universe, which means they had 6 years to build details upon which they can do all the other stuff. And after releasing Arcane, they realized that, like, it is so much easier to pick a story that already exists and that people know is cool and just pick from that. For example, when we talked to Kristen Link, the co-creator of Arcane, one of the things he said is that whenever people are discussing on the internet, what they want to see, Riot sees that. Like, they can now take the universe and they see what people are interested in. So in a way, all this giant background that they build, it has the value of essentially telling Riot what is popular. And now they have the ability to, like, when they get a budget for a show, they can just look at the things that people really love, and it's so easy for them to, like, build stuff on top of that. That's why, going years back, they really paid attention to building the foundations of the world first. Because again, it's not just that the world is massive, the history goes back a while. Like, I can probably sit here for many hours, going back decades. I can show you the entire timeline of what happened. Like, this is a never-ending story. So, like, seeing how Riot is now finally, again, it took them years, but seeing them now in the stage where they can start paying off the setups, like, the better the story was before when they wrote it, the better now the payoff is gonna be. And that is where the strength of this universe is. And when it comes to, like, comparing this universe to, like, others, like, I don't know, Warhammer, Warcraft, stuff like that, those universes don't really use the tools that much to pay off the stories. League is now going into totally different direction, where they are now trying to do this, and so far, with Arcane being the first step, they succeeded. Another thing that happened is that when they released the new cinematic, which now, took us from Piltover and Zaun now to Noxus, that cinematic became the most viewed cinematic in League's history. It came out 5 days ago. The last biggest cinematic came out 3 years ago. The second was 1 year ago. In 5 days, they destroyed it all, set a new record. So now, it is obvious that people are interested in this universe. And now, like, Riot has everyone in the palm of their hands. It's up to them to really pick where they want to go.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to see the buy-in for these characters, again, by people not necessarily interested in the game. They're interested in the world, the characters, and that is, maybe at the end of the day, worth all the money they spent to create Arcane. People are bashing them on, like, spent so much money, but to have that buy-in, to have that many people care about your property, there's so much to work with. As you said, there's a huge history, there's a big world. I genuinely don't know where, but that's why you're here. I'm very curious, because you said they're listening. Where would you like to see it go? What would you like them to explore next? Obviously, we're going to do a whole Noxus thing, and we're going to get into that. They introduced characters from it. Now we're going there. We're seeing more of it. They're throwing out things that, if you don't know the universe of League, it's like, what? Who is that troll? What's that about? Why are there a bunch of ice dudes? There's a lot of questions you can ask, and that's very cool, and I like that they're doing that. But where would you like to see them explore or dig a little deeper with?
So the beautiful thing about the map is that when you point at different regions, and they are clearly marked there, when you point at the different regions, every single region has a ginormous story, as in we're talking an entire book about every single region. So I'm just gonna do a very quick speed run through all the regions.
Oh boy.
So Noxus, speed run for Noxus, which is where we're heading right now. Basically, imagine the world was destroyed by these bloodthirsty demons, stuff like that. They are not really demons, doesn't matter, just the world is ravaged, right? Now you see little barbarians rising, and they're like, we're gonna build a new society. And there was one barbarian king called San Uzal, who basically was so good, he was just annihilating everyone. And he was killing everyone because he believed that when he dies, for every life that he took, he's just gonna be at the glorious table of the gods of the afterworld, and he's just gonna be dining with them because he's glorious. So he died, and there was nothing. He died for nothing, literally. And he was so angry at that point that his faith was false, that he was like, you know what? I'm gonna be the god of death. And so San Uzal literally was too angry to die. This is quite literally a point in his lore. And he started whispering in the language of the dead into the outside world. He found necromancers who raised him again. And so now he came back the second time as like an undead warlord. And so he started killing everyone again. And now he built the Immortal Bastion, which is now the capital city of Noxus, which is the biggest structure that was ever built in this universe. And he just went on a second conquest. This, on the timeline, is known as I believe, the Reign of the Iron Revenant, where he just went around the entire continent, started killing everyone. The thing is, he could only be stopped by an inside job, that being LeBlanc, this little witch that everyone knew about, but she was a mystery. So she made the entire continent to band together. Everyone hit the Immortal Bastion at the same time. And from the shadows, she banished this warlord into his armor. She banished him into this afterworld. And here's the thing. For the second time, every living soul that he killed was now back in the underworld, in the realm of the dead, now with him. So for every soul that he killed, he now had a new pawn back in his undead realm. Which means now, sure, he is banished beneath the Immortal Bastion again, but now he has an entire army of undead souls that he himself created, and now there's gonna be the second coming of Mordekaiser, which is where the story is right now. Right now, after Arcane, we are at the point where there is literally a guy that decided to become the god of death underneath the Immortal Bastion, which is the capital city of Noxus, and he's just trying to get out. And when he gets out, I hope Riot is saving it for the MMO, because that is a boss fight. So this is just one story in a region, in a game that has 170 champions. I literally explained the story of Mordekaiser, that is one guy, and a little bit of LeBlanc. That's a second person.
For people who are curious, LeBlanc is a character, besides being the inky shadow person who shows up and tortures everyone in Arcane. Is LeBlanc featured in the new content they just released? Or who are those characters? Give us a little bit of that as well.
So at the very end of the cinematic that now came out, we got two mysterious people. One of them is LeBlanc. That is the shadowy person from Arcane. You can notice the connection where in Arcane, it was a shadowy person with human fingers. In the cinematic, it is a human person with shadowy fingers. You can kind of see how those two images merge together, so it's obvious it's the same person. The person next to her was Vladimir, a bloodlord, a hemomancer, who, again, very massive history behind that guy, because he's the first ever hemomancer who got the blood magic from the demons that kind of destroy the world, that are not really demons, that I mentioned at the very beginning. And these two made together the Black Rose, which is a secret cabal that is secretly ruling Noxus from the shadows without anyone knowing it, and they are some of the most powerful mages in the history of this universe, and they are just sitting in Noxus making sure Mordekaiser doesn't get out. That is secretly, that is what the Black Rose was doing in Arcane. The problem is, no one watching Arcane knows this. Like, no one has any idea why the Black Rose was so interested in Hextech, for example. Well, according to the lore, they were interested in Hextech because they want us to use Hextech as a weapon to stop Mordekaiser from coming back. But again, if you watch Arcane, you'll have no idea.
Sure. And also, as characters, their reintroduction at the end of this cinematic we just got, they look different. Like, they are, admittedly, vastly improved on their original designs. I love the way they look. Very cool stuff. But if you were to go look them up right now, you would see different characters. They'd be a little, like, different headdress and different hair. Like, they just look a little bit different, so I'm very excited to see where they go with them. The other characters we saw, would you like to give a little quick recap of who they are? Some fan favorites in there.
When it comes to Noxus, still staying in Noxus, we had Elise, the spider lady. Elise is the head of House Kythera. Her story is basically, there were some political games inside the noble houses of Noxus. She got married to a guy that was from another house, and it turns out like she had a little bit more influence. So her husband was jealous of her power. He tried to poison her so that he could be the head of their house together. And she was like, you know what? No, I'm just gonna kill you. So this spider lady killed her husband, and then she was just dying there, and she was like, yep, I'm just gonna die. It turns out LeBlanc came out, and she was the one who visited her, and she was like, okay, we can make a deal. I can save you. I can show you how to save you, but you're gonna join the Black Rose. And so that's what happened. The way she was saved is that she was sent to the Shadow Isles, a whole another place on the map, where she met a spider god known as Vilemaw, who basically turned the poison from her husband's poison into like a spidery body. and that's how she became a spider lady. It's basically her only way of survival. Now she's part of the Black Rose, which means that she's helping technically the greater good, because again, they are stopping death itself from coming back. But she was there at a little Black Rose party. That's what we saw in the cinematic, like the people dancing around. They threw together a little party because the Black Rose wanted to recruit more powerful people into their cult. It turns out there is a leader in Noxus called Swain who knows that the Black Rose are scheming and doing really bad things from the shadows. And so Swain's entire goal is to make Noxus strong by rooting out all the corruption and all the bad stuff. So Swain, the leader of Noxus, is trying to root out the Black Rose. So he sent an assassin after them. That assassin being Katarina, who of course appeared in the cinematic. She got a little target, which was the guy that we saw there just standing and drinking his wine. That was the primary target. She took him down successfully, and then the scene cuts, and we don't know what happens next, which means that's where the story is gonna go next. So that was the Noxian part. Of course, there are 3 scenes mixed together. There is the one in Noxus with the Black Rose. There's also Mel now heading back to Noxus. That happened directly after Arcane. You may remember at the end of Arcane, she boarded the Noxian ships. Mel was heading back to Noxus.
And for the record, during that scene, the crows that show up, those are Swain crows?
So that was technically not confirmed yet, because there are 2 outcomes. And there's a big history behind all of this. If the Ravens,
sure.
Or if the Ravens, Ravens, not crows. Crows are
right.
Deep lore behind that too.
My bad. Yes, Ravens.
Demonic Ravens. Okay, so if those Ravens belong to Swain, it means there is a whole another event called the Invasion of Ionia. That would mean that already happened. So this is just a timeline. It is also possible that the Ravens don't belong to Swain yet, which means that this is happening like 60 years in the back. At that point, those Ravens would belong to the demon of secrets called Raum. This doesn't really matter yet, because it's really up to Riot to decide, hey, we're not really sure where specifically on the timeline Arcane happened. And there is a leeway, so they can just pick and choose at this point. But yes, the Ravens that we saw, sooner or later, they will belong to Swain, who is the leader of Noxus, and he's using the powers of the Demon of Secrets to essentially just see what's happening around Noxus and around the world. He's just sending the Ravens to get him information. And also, he's using the same Ravens to look for the Black Rose, which is why you can see the Ravens everywhere. And even in the cinematic, if you have a look at the scenes where Mel arrived on the shores and then she started walking to... There's a big gate, that golden gate, a whole another piece of history right there. That golden gate that she arrived at, you may hear in the cinematic the sound of ravens in the background. That is because the entire time, Swain, likely, or the demon, is he just sees everything that's happening. So everything right now in the story is also going to deal with the fact that Swain is LeBlanc's opposition technically, because he's the leader. Then LeBlanc is also trying to lead the Noxus just from the shadow, doing shady things. And now Mel arrived, and she also wants to lead Noxus, probably. So now we have a big clash of just people in power who want to lead Noxus, or at least they want to be in power for different reasons. And so yeah, when it comes to this Noxian storyline, there's gonna be a big clash of leadership.
Really quickly before I ask you a follow-up, because I got one, go over the other scene that was happening, the fight that's just a battle between big dude and other big dude.
I like that on the internet, people were so happy to see just men being manly, because in Arcane, there weren't too many manly men, and which is why immediately during the fight, Darius got naked. Anyway, so we got a battle between...
Yeah.
we got a battle between Darius and Trundle. Now, Darius is one of the strongest generals in the Noxian army. He's a powerhouse, and specifically, he is specialized at dealing with the Freiljord. Like, he led many missions into the north, into the Freiljord, to expand the Noxian territory there. So in this scene, we just saw one of the Noxian expeditions, where they were trying to expand their borders beyond Freiljord, so they just marched into the north, and long and behold, there are ice trolls everywhere in the Freiljord. So Trundle, being the leader of the trolls, just came down and he was like, hey, we're gonna figure this out like manly men and trolls, I guess. Now, the sketchy thing is, trolls are always about tricks and cheating. So even though the Noxians won and the trolls would have to retreat, you can see that some trolls actually bow down before Darius because, you know, some of them are honorable. The others, nah, they don't really care. They just walked away and they were like, okay, we'll get them next time. But yes, that entire scene of the trolls and Darius fighting, that is a very known thing that's happening in the lore where Noxus is constantly trying to expand into the Freiljord. And so, of course, they just have clashes with different Freljordians.
So you're saying that Black Rose is like trying to stop an old, I don't want to say old god, that has connotations, but you know what I mean, like a death god from coming back. Meanwhile, Swain is like, I don't like that they're up to no good. I don't know what they're doing. And then Mel is coming back and being like, hey, all y'all cut this shit out. So that's kind of the setup for where they're going with this story.
Yes, that is exactly what it is, yes.
Cool. All right. So then my question is, we have that. We have a Noxian arc, and we have a bunch of new characters, and potentially that could be a whole thing we get caught up in. But then at the same time, they've given us other tidbits, and I want to stick on kind of the Arcane side of it, because again, the world is huge, and there's a lot that we could cover. But they gave us things like Yordles and Yordle lore, and they were like, hey, Heimerdinger, everyone loves a good dinger, and he eviscerates, evaporates, he like implodes, whatever. The question becomes then, if you know your Yordle lore, is dude dead? How does death work with Yordles? Are we gonna see more? Are we gonna get like a whole thing? Are we gonna get Bandle, whatever? Like, what's the deal there?
So, anyone who knows the lore knows that Yordles are immortal. Which means when a Yordle dies, they essentially turn into magical spiritual goop and they go back into Bandle City, which is their own Yordlish realm. And there they likely reform or they turn into a flower or something like that. We're not really sure what happens. It's because death for a Yordle is extremely rare. It never happens. But essentially, Yordles are just pure magic. It is impossible to kill them. When they die, they're just magic. So what happened to Heimerdinger is likely either he eviscerated and he was actually, against all odds, turned into magic, or it is extremely likely that he just hopped into another dimension and he's just happy there. Because again, Arcane kind of introduced the idea of, yep, there can be alternative universes, so you can hop in between. But either way, Heimerdinger is definitely not dead. And in fact, just to make sure that we know, again, Christian Link told us that he would like to do more stories with not only Heimerdinger, but also Victor. Which means, when you have a look at who actually died in Arcane, not that many people, and especially not the Yordles.
Sure. And honestly, I think once you introduce alternate realities and other dimensions, really you end up in sort of a Marvel Cinematic Universe thing. It's like, yeah, they're fine.
Yeah.
They might have died in this universe, but they'll come back. We'll bring another character in. And so that's potentially interesting, which again, I think is why a lot of people are like, well, I mean, Summoner's Rift, though, it's like a whole thing, and they could still be alive out there. I'm interested to see where they go with it, because sometimes...
That is true. That is true that the moment you open the can of worm, which is like just alternative universes, you immediately have a lot of problems, which is why, even though in Arcane we started dealing with alternative universes, they were very dialed down, and they just made sure, like, hey, hopping between realms does not really happen. It's nearly impossible. Even though, in the past, technically, there was a whole character called Zillion, who is all about looking across different universes. So, like, the power of just dealing with alternative universes, that has been canon for many years. Just hopping between the universes, extremely rare. And Arcane kind of showed us that there needs to be a lot of stuff perfectly aligned in order for something like this to happen, which is just, you know, which is basically the entire ending, spoiler alert, for Arcane, with just dropping the runes, and like, he tried so many different times to actually make it happen, and it all led into them actually crossing the border of getting into another universe.
Yeah, and going back to that possibility of all the different things out there, and you know, all the attempts, right? We saw all the runes, and at the end we saw all the different versions of the runes. Very cool scene. I love when we get wild and out there stuff like that. But then the question becomes, how wild and out there are we going to get? Because you mentioned MMO, right? There's a lot of potential there for, you know, expansions after expansion after expansion of new stories. But when it comes back to some of the terminology they used, I would love to know what is the same? What is different? So, Anomaly, Hex Core, Wild Runes, the Void. Like, there's just so many different things that exist that they can pull from, and I don't know that I, let alone many people, understand half of it. Like, what is out there? What do all these things really mean? And
right,
I know they have Void characters, right? Like, there's a whole thing, but how does that all affect what's going on and what they're trying to do?
So, for example, right? For example, we talked about Noxus dealing with Freiljord, how they are trying to expand there. It turns out the Freiljord, secretly, you might think like, hey, trolls and fighting for survival in the frozen tundras and stuff like that. Well, secretly, the story of the Freiljord is all about the Void. Because once upon a time, basically the beginning of the universe. So I'm gonna give you the setup of the greatest evil that there possibly can be in this universe. Like, you cannot get bigger than that. So, basically, once upon a time, there was darkness. There was absolutely nothing, just pitch black. And in this black, there were some weird things just moving and sleeping. They didn't do anything because there was just nothing. And then there was light. Little spark of light, which was existence. It turns out these little things, or massive things, that were just sleeping in the dark cosmos of nothingness, they didn't like being woken up. So they looked at the little light that was shining in the darkness, and they were like, yeah, we should snuff that out, just so we can sleep again. So now, these massive things are the Watchers. And they just wanna shut down reality, which is shining like a bright light, because they just wanna sleep. That's basically their motive. These are big creatures that wanna sleep, and we are annoying them. So these creatures were like, alright, so we are a little bit too big to get into reality, because it's like a tiny spark compared to them. Okay, so we need to shut it down from the inside. So we are gonna start reaching inside reality, and we will start corrupting things and turning them to our side so that they can eventually just shut everything from the inside, because we are too big to fit in. So, in the Freiljord, they found 3 sisters who were the leaders of the Freiljord during the ancient times. And they offered a deal to one of them, that one being Lissandra, the Ice Witch. People might know her from League of Legends, the game. And the Watchers basically said, hey, if you set up the Freiljord so that we can fit in at least our smallest creature inside, we will make all of you immortal. And Lissandra was like, yup, that sounds cool, we're gonna do that. And so Lissandra set up the Freiljord for the arrival of the Watchers. The Watchers send in their monstrosities through, and Lissandra realized, nope, this was a mistake. Which means, what she did is that she melted everyone around her into just ice, and she used that ice to freeze the little void rift that was beneath the Freiljord. And so now, all the Watchers that were trying to get through that hole beneath the Freiljord, they are now frozen there. Which is why in League of Legends, sometimes you may hear about the Frozen Watchers. Those are the Watchers that were frozen by Lissandra in the Freiljord. Now the thing is, you know how Mordekaiser is now hidden underneath Noxus, just sitting there and like waiting for his arrival? Essentially the exact same thing is happening in the Freiljord, where the Watchers are just waiting there in the Freiljord, just like one day we're gonna get out. So League does have a little bit of an issue of having too many threats just spread around the different regions, but yeah, every region has their own like main story that's happening there. And so for the Freiljord was really there to introduce the Void, which is how League's universe is really dealing with bigger stories. They don't give us a story that's like, hey, this is a story that happened at the very beginning. No, they always tie everything together. This is the strongest point of this universe. So instead of telling us, hey, once upon a time there was this story with the Watchers, they are like, no, we're gonna use the Freiljord as a region to tie it into these historical events. And this is really how League's universe works. They always use a region that people know, and they use it to explain something from the history.
Are there any other areas of that same level of importance where long ago something happened, and eventually we will have to deal with that?
Everywhere. Absolutely
okay.
Everywhere. Again, if we're talking about the MMO, I'm just gonna spoil all the expansions for you.
Sure.
For example, I'm still gonna stay in the northern continent because right below Freiljord we have Demacia. Now Demacia is a really cool place because they are hidden in a magical forest that absorbs magic, which means mages can't really do anything to them. Now here's the thing, the reason why this region was built is because after everything was ravaged and as these barbarians in Noxus started rising, people started discovering what is known as the World Runes. The World Runes are magical items, and again, we know this because of Demacia. They are magical items that were scattered across this planet by a mischievous celestial. Essentially, there was a godly celestial being that was like, I'm gonna have some fun with this reality, and so they just threw magical rocks across the planet, and people started discovering them, and they started using them as giant magical nukes against each other. And so, the Kingdom of Demacia was built as a region where magic is useless, because the giant forest has the ability to absorb all magic. And again, we learned about this event with the mischievous celestial, which is a historical event for this universe, because of Demacia.
Okay, what else do we got?
So next, if we move, for example, to Mount Targon, going to the south and right next to the desert. Mount Targon is extremely important because during the times when Celestials were dealing with this planet, this is when mortals were really just primitive monkeys to them, they raised a mountain, by which I mean the Celestials literally just reached out, they pinched the ground, they pulled it up, and they just created a mountain. This mountain is essentially a portal into their celestial realm. And this is where the first civilizations that kind of knew what's happening with the cosmos started to rise up. Not only do we now have a mountain that is connected to like celestials, and you have celestial dragons there and stuff like that. So it turns out there is one celestial dragon people may know from League of Legends known as Aurelian Soul. Aurelian Soul is basically a giant cosmic being that can create stars. Like, that's the kind of power level that we're talking about. Like, sure, in League you can be killed by Teemo, but really, in the scheme of the lore, it is a celestial being that is creating stars. And this being turns out to be egoistic. So what happened on Mount Targon is that as the people realized that, hey, there are these weird celestial beings above us, they started worshipping this cosmic dragon, and the dragon liked it. So every couple of years, the dragon came back to the planet and he just watched what people did. And once upon a time, the people made this cosmic dragon a massive crown. We don't really know how they did it, just they did it, okay? They built a giant golden crown for the dragon, and the dragon, being egoistic, of course, donned it, and so now the dragon is flying around with the golden crown. It turns out that was a mind-controlling crown, and so now the people of Mount Targon literally hold the reins on the creator of stars. The reason why this is cool is because not only did mortals successfully enslave a celestial, which means they hold like unimaginable power, but now that mortals essentially held a piece of celestial magic, they started using it for other regions, which means if you have a look at the region that's right next to Targon, which is the deserts of Shurima, these people spread into the desert and they built what is known as the Sun Disk, which is a giant golden disk hovering in the middle of the desert. And they realized, hey, if we use this celestial magic, we shine it onto the disk, and then it reflects into a mortal being, it's gonna empower them. And so now you have Targon, which introduced a celestial cosmic power, leading into Shurima, which is a totally different region, and there, the same celestial magic is now being used to create super soldiers known as the Ascended. So, again, this universe is all about connections. Any questions?
That is long ago in the past, right? Because that civilization has fallen in modern society and then has some sort of connection to Piltover?
It does. So, okay, we're in for a ride.
I'm here for it.
I will try to remember everything from just from my mind. So, as this Shuriman Empire was being built with the idea of like, hey, we are probably the strongest in the world because we can literally just create cosmic soldiers out of nothing. So they built this, what is known as the Golden Army of the God Warriors. You know, they were very edgy and cool with their naming. And they used this army to just conquer the world. That was their idea. And according to the lore, there is time when they were like, yep, we essentially conquered the world. There is like, no one can hold us back, so we're just gonna march everywhere around. And so this empire started spreading around until they found one little spot on the map, which you might notice is in the south, and it's just a little gray area. And the reason why it's gray is because it was destroyed by the Void. And this is where the connections go back. Freiljord, of course, already set up the Watchers by this point. So we know what the Watchers are doing and we know why they are there. So later we got this story of the Icathian Kingdom, where you had a lot of mages in a kingdom who were sitting right next to the Shuriman Empire. And they were like, you know what? We don't want to be conquered. And so they realized, well, we don't really have the God Warriors. We can't really stop them. So we have to try something. And so they just looked for different kinds of magic until they realized, hey, there is this thing known as the Void. Maybe we should summon it into battle to protect us. And so that's what they did. The mages of the Icathian Kingdom, just at the exact point, the Golden Army was literally at their gates, and there was this massive battle. It's the battle for the Icathian Kingdom. The Icathians summoned the Void. They summoned these giant creatures, just destroyed everything, devastated the land, and now what happened is that, yes, sure, the kingdom was destroyed. But at the same time, all the god warriors who were there present at the battle and who later went home, their mind started being tainted by the void that they saw. So this was a first little hint at like, hey, something's weird. These celestial warriors that we created, okay, their mind is like not what it used to be. At the same time, there is a whole another story with Emperor Azir, one of the best emperor the kingdom has ever had for one simple reason. While every emperor before him had tons of slaves and they just, classic Egypt. What he did is that he actually, when he was a kid, he had a slave friend known as Zerath. Again, this is someone you may know from League of Legends. And this slave friend who grew up with him, later when he became the emperor, he turned Zerath into his advisor. And so he realized that, slaves are also people. So the day that he became the emperor, what Azir wanted to do is that he wanted to free all the slaves. The thing is, Zerath didn't notice, and the entire time as they were being friends and they were growing up, Zerath secretly hated Azir because just like the other emperors before him, he just had slaves and he wasn't doing anything about it. Meanwhile, as a secret, as a surprise, he wanted to free them all. Well, it didn't get to that point, and Zerath betrayed Azir. He killed him before he could even free the slaves. And without the emperor in the middle, now the entire empire was without their leader. At the same time, the way Zerath betrayed Azir is by just absorbing all the magic from the Sun Disk, which depleted it, and now the Sun Disk collapsed. So now, you had a collapsed Sun Disk in the middle of the empire, which means the icon of the empire was gone. They didn't have a leader, and their god warriors had corrupted mind, which started a whole new era known as the Darkin War, where the Darkin are these demonic beings-ish that destroy the world, essentially. What happened there is that the god warriors started fighting for dominance, because one of them had to be the leader, and no one knew who would lead. So they all started fighting each other, these really powerful beings. And there was one of them known as Zolani. This is not a champion in League of Legends, but everyone is just hoping that one day she will be. What Zolani did is that she realized, hey, what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna help my fellow god warriors by giving them blood magic. Secretly, she spread blood magic to all the god warriors because eventually she wants to use them to control them all and just basically bring them back in line. What happened, unfortunately, is that as these god warriors, now infused with blood magic, just ravaged the entire world, the Celestials came back and they were like, you know what? This place is not great. Everything's on fire, everything's getting destroyed, maybe we should do something about it. And so, the aspect of Twilight, people may know her as Zoe, but before it was Zoe, it was actually a different aspect, doesn't matter. The aspect of Twilight, a Celestial, came back onto this planet and gave mortals a really cool piece of magic. She taught mortals how to bind these god warriors inside weapons. And that is how the Darkin weapons, which people may know from the game, that's how they came to be. Because over time, again, as they started being twisted with blood magic, they became known as Darkin, which is a Shuriman word for something bad. I forgot that, doesn't matter. They are just now known as Darkin. So the Darkin, using the celestial magic again, because this is a region with celestial magic, even though it is a desert. The Darkin were now bound inside weapons, sealed by the mortals, and they were just scattered and hidden across the world. Because it turns out, if you touch a Darkin weapon, that Darkin can reach out into your mind and dominate you. This is, for example, in League of Legends, this is Aatrox. Kayn is holding a Darkin weapon. There is a dog that literally bit into a dagger and became a Darkin, known as Naafiri. And if you go into the game Legends of Runeterra, a card game that is based on League of Legends, there you can see a bunch of other Darkin. Basically, these beings just ravage the entire world. And you know, now this leads into back into the other regions, because they were spread across the world, which means they ravaged pieces of Noxus, because then the barbarians had to rise and do something there. They were around Demacia, because after they destroyed the world there, the runes were being found, and now there were magical nukes. So again, all the events are connected to everything else, and this happens constantly. But in general, the Shuriman story is celestial magic was used to create super soldiers got corrupted, and they started ravaging the world.
And then that leads to sort of the Arcane connection of Piltover in what way?
So the way this is connected is that Zaun, once upon a time, Zaun was known as Oshrava Zaun, and it was a city that is, even if you have a look at the map, it is quite close to the Shuriman Empire. Now, Oshrava Zaun was always used as a trade city because it is right in the middle of the continents. And it was essentially a mixture of all different cultures, and they worshipped the spirit of wind there, known as Janna. In Arcane, you could see all the different statues of her around. That's why she was there. It's because people worshipped her. The reason why people worshipped the spirit of the wind is because it was a trade city. They had a lot of ships just sailing around, trading with people, so they were always praying for good wind so that they can just deliver their goods faster and, profit. However, when Azir was spreading the Shuriman Empire around, all he wanted is for everyone to worship him and no one else. So when the Shuriman army eventually arrived at Piltover and Zaun, back in the day, again, it was just Oshrava Zaun, they started tearing down all the statues of Janna, and they just started destroying all the false idols, as they put it. Which is why, in Arcane, whenever there is Janna, it is somewhere below Zaun, just hidden away, because it is in a place that people didn't look, and it was just hidden from the ancient influence of Shurima. So, the connection between the Shuriman history and Arcane is that once upon a time, Zaun was actually a city that was conquered by Shurima.
Okay. And sticking with Arcane for a sec, because there's a lot of things in there that I think a lot of people like answers to, just because they're, general subjects of interest. We're talking about Zaun. Down below, there are some scenes, and this is one of those, is it important or is it just really cool to look at? There are some scenes where we're seeing weird-looking fish swimming around. Or, what is really going on with all that purple goop? What's the deal there? Is that anything significant? Or is that just, it was cool, and it's explained in the show, and we don't need to get into it?
So I very specifically asked about this, because I myself wasn't really sure. If anything that looks voidy and is whispering to you, that's the void. There is no equivalent. So whenever Shimmer is on screen, you can actually hear the little whispers, and something's weird. Well, in the show, when Singed was making Shimmer, you could always see there's weird purplish goopy something in the background, and it looked very voidy, so I asked about it, and basically what I was told is that the void can be spread around the world in smaller doses, which means sure, Shimmer isn't fully a void being pumped into people, but there is just a small influence of the void added into these things where if you hear a faint whisper, yeah, sure, it makes sense. Maybe there was a lizard that was somehow corrupted by the void that Singed squeezed into a tube and made Shimmer with it. That's possible. But if you're asking hey, is Shimmer actually just pumped out of the void? Not directly, but I was told that there is some influence.
So there's nothing like Silco injecting void into his eye, kind of. That's not happening. That's just...
Unfortunately. So there is one void rift technically that is close to Piltover. It's slightly to the south. So there is void influence that is right behind the corner from Piltover. So whenever you look at the monsters that we saw down there when Silco was in his lab, those can actually be void twisted creatures. Because again, what the void does is that It takes creatures that are just alive, it takes them into the void, it transforms them and twists them and spits them back up. So if there is anything voidy, like we could see just some tentacles around, it could be just a sea monster, to be honest, because Piltover is right on the edge where if you go a little bit further, you'll get to Bilgewater, and in Bilgewater, that's just sea monsters everywhere. However, it is absolutely possible that it is also something that's just twisted by the void. Unfortunately, we don't have a direct answer on that.
Okay, yeah, all you're saying to me is set up for MMOs, which I think is very funny.
Yes.
It's like, we got
Yes.
void creatures, we got Darken, we got undead, we got...
Yep.
There's so many different enemies, it sounds very MMO-ish.
Not even that, like I made so many Riot MMO videos on my channel, and they are like some of the most popular videos on my channel because people are so excited about this, but also because there is so much to talk about. Because if you have a look at the Darken, for example, the Darken weapons would be a really cool legendary drop for the MMO, for example. So it's not like Riot is only setting up the world and the story. There is so much beyond that is set up for some kind of like RPG purpose with loot and interesting items, and there is like interesting magic. And once everything merges together into an MMO, the world will be happy.
Sure, it has the same vibe as way back in Vanilla WoW days when everyone was like, the corrupted Ashbringer. You had to go through the quest, you got to take that thing, and then you have a good weapon at the end. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. It's very interesting to see kind of the building blocks of something much bigger and MMO-y, which I'm very excited about. Honestly, you got me hyped. I'm pretty like,
Yep.
Okay, all right. Which, again, having all of this built-in lore and creating this story, while it may not work for League, it may very well work for whatever comes next.
Absolutely. Again, we can have a whole another talk only talking about weapons, for example. Like you mentioned Ashbringer, I can mention 8 other weapons that are in this universe right now with the exact same lore. There are weapons that are all about like, if you hold it and you kill someone else, you absorb souls with it. Not really Frostmourne, okay, but close enough.
Sure.
You have literally a gun, which if you shoot someone with a gun, whoever that person killed is resurrected. I don't know if it makes sense. People pretend it doesn't exist, but it's known as the Absolver. Basically, if a murderer murders someone and you kill the murderer, everyone that murderer murdered is back. You have all of these kinds of weapons.
You can tell that it stems from the fact that long, long ago, this all sort of the impetus was people playing Warcraft 3 and playing the bonus maps that you could make, and then it all kind of spun off from there. And so that's why you'll see characters that are like, wait a minute, that kind of looks like... They just made a different version of that character because in its infancy, League had some of that, DNA in it. And so it's very interesting to see that some of that's still there, and I love that.
I mean, there are, very specifically mentioning Warcraft, there are actually directly characters who originated from Warcraft. For example, League was known as Dota back in the day. It wasn't the same game, but it was based on Dota back in the day. For example, there is one character known as Jarvan IV who has the voice line, for the king! For my father, the king. Which is a line that Arthas has in Warcraft 3. So like, League wasn't even hiding their influence that came from Warcraft and those classic RPGs back in the day.
Yeah, this is before Dota 2 existed, and they had, Heroes of New Earth. There was a bunch of different ones that existed, and they all were trying to capture that thing, and League was the one that just blew up. And so it's interesting to see that some of that's still in there. Going back to some of the other terminology and things, just to kind of like end that discussion, because I'm sure you have answers for this.
Yep.
What would you classify that big Orby anomaly as? The thing that kind of was the big focus of the last 5 episodes of the final season? What is that?
While everyone was hoping that we would get some kind of clash with Caitlyn being a dictator, which didn't happen, unfortunately. That's one of the big critiques that Arcane got, where the story just went a totally different direction. In the end, Arcane was technically set up as a new thing. Now, I say as a new thing, the reality is, Arcane was being written for 9 years. This is like way back at the beginning when this universe started getting its cool twists and turns, which means that as Riot was coming up with these like the Watchers and these dark powers in the background and like all of these threats, Arcane was there from the very beginning, because even if you have a look at the art book that Arcane got, there are the first concepts around the Arcane, which means from the very beginning, Riot knew that they wanna land here with the Arcane being a new cosmic force that is influencing this world. But up until this point, it seems like Riot was really just saving it for Arcane, and they didn't really have the need to explain it in another region, because they probably just didn't want to take the thunder away from Arcane. At the same time, if they set it up slightly better, the payoff might have been better.
Yeah, it's a huge mystery. I think it visually stunning, very cool to look at. By the end, we're metaphysical and we're out there and we're getting crazy. I love that stuff, but it also leaves a lot open to interpretation, which I think you saw online, people trying to figure out what the hell really happened. And yeah, that's obviously the choice of the directors to be like, yeah, talk about it afterwards. But when it comes to big lore building, I'm like, but what does that mean though?
So there are cool things that you can pick out. Again, if you know the lore like really deeply, you can see some similarities. For example, it is obvious we are dealing with celestial magic because there's space and there's souls and stuff like that. What is cool is that when Victor and Jace used the Rune of Acceleration, which is the thing that he had in his hand, and they like opened up tiny portals, and through those tiny portals you could see the souls kind of like leaving out into the space. Those portals are the same celestial magic that we know from someone like Bard. So it's not like they are making up an entire new kind of magic. They are still using the foundation that we know. They are just giving it a twist that we haven't seen before. Which again, you know, this universe kind of has its rules, and they are trying to they are trying to stay within those boundaries. But at the same time, this was written from the very beginning, so they wanted to keep some kind of mystery for this. And this is where we landed.
Interesting. Yeah, they definitely did keep some mystery. There's been a lot of conversation online, and I'm just like, I don't know what's real here. There's a lot of stuff. And even if I go and watch your videos, I'm like, okay, but is that just your opinion, or is that what that means? And so it's very interesting to see all the hot takes about the last episode especially.
Whenever I'm making these videos, I always try to say, like, you know, when I'm not sure about something, I say, like, yeah, this is what I believe it is. But when I say, like, hey, this is what it is, I usually try to, like, find some kind of source to, like, really let people know, like, hey, we actually know about this from, there's a written story, or there is a book, or there was a cinematic, or something like that. So, like, I always try to find sources, and for most of the details around Arcane, thankfully we have them.
Right, and when it comes to Hextech, for example, that's a thing that's in the game, and they try to give it, like, some cool backstory with Arcane, and when it comes to that, is there any sort of thing we can take moving forward, or is that kind of done as a story? Like, they created it, realized not the way to go, we're moving on. Or is that something that will be featured later?
So, Hextech is a thing that was confirmed to basically come back, but not on the scale that we saw right now. Because there are other stories that were confirmed to still happen. For example, there is Camille, which is an assassin who has an entire Hextech body, like her body was replaced with Hextech. So we know that Hextech is gonna come back at some point, and Christian Ling even mentioned it. Hextech is something that, no matter what happens, no matter the universe, Hextech is gonna be developed by someone, which is, again, this actually, you could see that in Arcane, in the alternative universe. The reason why at the end you saw Jinx open up the drawer and you saw the Hextech crystals there is because that was a teaser that in that universe, Jinx was the one who figured out Hextech there. So no matter what happens, someone is gonna figure out how to basically, with science, master magic, which is what Hextech is. So there is gonna be, canonically, there is gonna be a second wave of Hextech, but because you don't have a mastermind like Victor or someone like that behind it, it is likely not gonna get as destructive because, again, you need a lot of stars to align in order to get to the territory of awakening our Hextech into celestial magic and hopping universes and stuff like that. So Hextech likely coming back, just not on that scale.
Okay, so unifying theory. Let me see if I got this correct. We have the void. It is darkness. And in that darkness, a little bit of like, boop, little spark of something. And they're like, bro, no, we're trying to sleep. This is trash. Get out of here. In that spark, what we would see as massive and huge, to them it's very small, but in that massive and huge spark, they're Celestials. And the Celestials going around creating stuff, doing things, dropping off runes, making cool magic things, dealing with the arcane. And it exists in that small little speck. And it is, did it create Celestials, or is it just byproduct of the universe, or are the Celestials part of the arcane? How does that little bit work really quick?
The way we understand it is that Arcane is really just magic, or is an alternative to magic, which means Arcane would technically be a tool that maybe the Celestials would use.
Okay.
It is basically what magic is to us, Arcane is likely to the Celestials.
Okay. And then the Celestials, like going down to Runeterra and like, hey, we're dropping off runes and we're doing cool things. And I would assume that's the difference between a wild rune, where it's like, this is just, it's uncontrollable. It's getting wild out there. And then societies appear, they worship the different Celestials. Some ego-driven dragon is like, hey man, I love crowns, forms the first like really big empire. That empire spans the globe, shit goes down, bad stuff happens, and from there, the void and whatever starts to filter in, and we have now kind of the path we're on, and that's how it all connects. And be it an Arcane anomaly or anything else, it all really is just these different sources of powers conflicting on sort of a universal scale, and then down on the planet or the surface is this microcosm of all that stuff going on. And it's little tiny stories of all of that. And even though people have their own motivations and it's like, oh, this is for Noxus and this is, it's all really this big grander thing, which at the end of the day, again, sounds like an MMO.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed the fact that essentially the story of League of Legends is, imagine the different regions, each having a superpower, and occasionally those superpowers clash. Like we saw it in the cinematic where Darius, sure, at that point he was just a Noxian, but Noxus really, really strong people who just like to fight and kill. He fought Trundle. Trundle had True Ice. You know what True Ice is? True Ice is the ice that was tainted by the Watchers, which we talked about before. So you saw that little power from the Freiljord clash with the might of Noxus. So every time there is like some kind of a fight somewhere, it is always just a battle of superpowers that come from different regions.
Sure. And then sometimes people are like, we don't want any of that. So you have like for Demacia, and then they have their whole little magic no-go zone.
But even that is a superpower, because the funny twist is, as the forest and as like all the things that they make, as it all absorbs magic, that magic is in those things. So technically the forest that absorbed all the magic is now just a ticking nuke. Because one day, that magic is gonna be unleashed.
Sure. And then that's a whole other sort of end of a giant sun disk style collapse of
That's a
society.
whole another expansion for the MMO, right?
Right. Again, MMO, full on. And honestly, kind of hype about that. Because again, as a person who's not a big, like, online PvP person, mostly because I'm a salty bastard. Like, one of the saltiest. You get me playing other people, and I will just, it's like driving in a car. I'll say things that I was like, I didn't know that was in me. And so, I don't want that. And so I'm very excited for what comes next and what they have to offer. And honestly, Arcane, like, hit something in me that as a lore nerd, as a person who when I play games, I'm all in on the backstory. I was so excited for, I can't wait. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, I don't want to, I'm not going to learn mid. Like, it's not what I'm going to do.
Yep.
I don't want to learn all these abilities or which weapon goes with what and what's the, no, I just am excited for the potential of a really great MMO that exists in this universe so I can walk around in the streets like I really want to do after having watched the show.
You're not the only one. Like, this is legitimately most people who watched Arcane and got excited for this, they don't want to play League. They want to play anything else. Literally anything that's not League. But thankfully, we know that Riot is working on stuff because they always have the job listings up and stuff like that. So we know they are also working on some kind of RPG that should be single player for all we know. And we know this because I believe this was at the end of 2023. Mark Merrill actually confirmed it, that they are working on multiple games. Not just the MMO, just multiple games, and also single-player games, because not everything can be live service. I believe that is a direct quote.
And does this have any impact, or is it impacted by the changes they made when they got rid of all the different bonus games, the extra, universe expanding games? Is that a different thing? That was the more indie side, I guess?
The way I interpret this is that they had Riot Forge, which was basically Riot teaming up with indie studios to make games that the indie developers already knew how to make.
Sure.
Which means like the Ruined King it wasn't a reskin of, I believe it was Battle Chasers.
By the way, I loved that comic as a kid, so it was really cool to see the Battle Chasers. Anyway, please continue. Sorry.
So it wasn't really a reskin, but it was an upgrade. So basically what Riot did is that they looked for developers who knew how to make games. They already released the game, and they were like, hey, do you want to make another one that's in the universe of League of Legends? And that's what they did. The issue with this is that even though it is technically Riot, they branded themselves as Riot Forge. So now people were like, okay, this is not Riot, this is something else. But also, it is indie developers who have way smaller audiences on their own. So if you take these two things and you release a game with it, it just doesn't land such a big audience. It's actually like way too narrow, which is why they shut down Riot Forge, because Riot Forge didn't have the reach they hoped for, and they started making the games internally themselves. Now, of course, because it means those games likely have bigger budget and they really want to make sure they are good, it takes slightly longer to make them, but we now know that they canceled one project of making more games and they started making them internally, so that the hope is it is gonna have wider audience because now it's Riot Games making those games.
Yeah, I'm curious what would have happened with Forge if those games had been released post Arcane.
I wonder about that too, because to be honest, the Arcane, just whatever happened after it is nuts. Like, all the numbers quadrupled. It doesn't even matter what you do. If you play League, if you talk about League, doesn't even matter. Doesn't even matter if people don't like League. They still like watching League.
Right, and I'm all of those games, especially if you're going to develop like an RPG with a story, or you're going to develop a platformer thing, if you're going to develop, they had so many different games they created, but those games at the end of the day really were for the fans of League.
Yes.
And League players are just going to play League. They aren't going to somehow be like, well, yeah, I always wanted to play a 20-hour bonus RPG about a few characters that may not have even been the characters that I like.
That is the reason why so many people were mad when they shut out Riot Forge. Because, I mean, I say so many people. It's the people who play the games. Like, the people who play the games, they love them. The only issue was that portion of the players was quite small, and Riot just wanted to say, like, hey, we want to make cool things, and we don't mind if they are not that profitable. We just want to make sure that like more people can play them, which is essentially what they are doing now. Again, it just takes a little bit longer, which everyone's like, okay, just give us the next thing, please. But yeah, I hope that Riot knows what they are doing with this setup, because everyone is excited and everyone is waiting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because it was one of those times where they're releasing story-based content around a game that really isn't known for people caring much about the story. Obviously, there are some. I'm talking to one of them. Yep. But it isn't something that a lot of people cared about. Every one of my friends who plays League all the time, they aren't in it for the story. They like their character. In fact, many of the people that I knew who play, some of the funniest conversations is them being upset at Arcane only focusing on certain characters. Like, oh, I hate those characters. I'm in mid lane and they're coming. And like, I don't want to watch that, which I think is very funny. But it's interesting that they were like, yeah, we're going to tell stories. And we're going to try and get our audience to buy in, when really the lesson we have all learned is that there's a whole audience out there who wants to buy in, but it wasn't even on their radar, because they were not concerned about League, because all they saw was, oh, it's the PvP thing where you run down lanes and you jungle a little bit, and that's not for me, so I don't care what's going on there. And suddenly there are all these people who's like, yo, I care a lot about what's going on there, just not the actual playing of it, which is very funny. But if there were other games that suddenly after, Arcane Season 1's over, for example, they're like, yo, do you want to know more about the world? Let me tell you about this really cool thing we're doing. I think it would have been much bigger.
I actually wonder what the Steam numbers are gonna look like on the Forge games. Like, because like Ruined King, amazing RPG.
Very
people
cool.
Love that one.
Yep.
It's just that people didn't really know not only about the story, but they just didn't know it existed. So now that Arcane is out and people are interested in they are interested in just finding something. Like, people are actively looking for something. I wonder what the numbers are gonna look like now, because there should be something happening.
You would think. We'll see. I mean, again, it might be all eggs in the MMO basket. It might be whatever else they're working on next. There is potential for them to continue the Arcane base storyline beyond Mel going to Noxus. I mean, again, I think it's safe to say that based on context clues alone, Jinx is fine. That ship at the end is Jinx sailing off to be like, look, I told y'all the best thing to do is walk away. So that's what I'm doing. I feel like there's a lot they could do with. They have a whole scene at the end where it's like, we got to have our two leads have a like, man, thank God that's all over, but I'm still with you if anything crazy comes up next. So there's potential for them to create all sorts of things based off of that. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, who is really dead? What is death in a universe where there's the multiverse and you can travel through it all and there's different versions of reality where different things happen? There's so many possibilities. It seems like not capitalizing on that would be very foolish.
So here's the thing. As League introduced the new seasons, which is basically their way of hopefully finally expanding the lore through League in some way, they also said like, hey, we are fine with exploring alternative universes, which also means like the different skin lines that are in League, they have their own universes, and technically, if you really think about the way that alternative universes are working in Arcane, hey, there is a way for the characters to jump into the Spirit Blossom universe or something like that. And they said, hey, maybe there is gonna be a season that's about like something alternative. So there is the potential that Riot might also explore that.
I am excited to see where they go with it. There's a lot, as we've discussed, there's a lot there.
Look, this universe is so big that if not only when the MMO comes out, because it's gonna come out eventually, obviously, we are at the place where the universe is set up, and now it's just that Riot can pick where they want to place you on the map, and everything else is a DLC. So now I wonder, I don't even care where Arcane is going. Screw that. I wonder, am I gonna be placed? No, I know that Arcane fans don't want to see anything else. No, I want to be placed somewhere between Noxus and Demacia. Lock everything else behind expansions and DLCs, just so that the MMO can last for as long as possible, and they will just slowly give us the other regions. And we're gonna be happy for about 20 years before we die, and that's all I care
You're
about.
only giving me 20 years? Man, that's rough.
I give myself 20
We're
years.
only giving
That's all I care about.
You gotta last longer, man. I'm gonna have questions. I'm gonna be like,
Okay, sure.
hold on, what does that mean? You can't.
Someone has to explain it.
We're gonna have brain in the jar you and just keep it going. I'm so sorry. You will be doing this till you're 90.
You know what? Sure, I'm gonna be explaining to my grandkids. So do you wanna know about the Great Blade of Viego?
You know
I
what?
won't have hands. I'll be just a head.
Yeah. With little robot tentacles.
Yeah.
Necrit, thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this. I learned so much, and I genuinely feel like I am prepared for whatever comes next, be it MMO or some other game they're working on. This was great. This was exactly what I wanted.
Look, you'll learn like 30% of the base setup, probably. I could keep going for literally hours. Again, I am known as a guy who takes a tweet and turns it into a 40-minute video. That's what I'm known for. And so yeah, when it comes to explaining the universe, I love this. I obviously made some people mad because I'm just remembering everything from my mind. So like, there is gonna be some tiny things that probably maybe I didn't land. It's fine. But yeah, this universe is massive. There is a lot that people can dive into, and hey, if you want, just look at the map. Just click around the map. That's the best way to explore this universe.
And additionally, besides the map or delving into lore themselves, tell them where they can find you and all your cool content.
So I am on YouTube, known as Necrit. It might be Necrit94. No, Necrit94 might be on Twitter, because I come from the old ages where people put their age into their name.
Yep.
And so,
Yes.
I am basically mainly on YouTube and Twitter, because even though it's a hellhole, unfortunately, it's the best place to spread your videos and content around. But that's it.
Again, thank you. This was really cool. I am so excited for the future. You've got me hyping away. I was not hype for a Riot property in some time. So I'm on that train. I am with you now.
I am happy to curse you with the idea that the MMO can be hyped.
It may not come out for some time, but it doesn't matter. I will be there. I was like the entire time thinking, yep, This is a day one for me. I'm doing this. I don't know what's about to happen.
See, yeah. Do you know what race you're playing already? Because I can pick.
Oh, please. If yordles are available, I'm yodeling. Are you kidding me?
They have to be.
I'm going to be the smallest, goofiest looking dude who ever existed. I don't even know what's going to... I'm going to be a scout and like shoot stuff at people. Oh, it's going to be amazing. I don't want to... I'm not out there to be a tough guy.
You're going to be loved.
I want to be a little tiny baby boy who runs around, just slaps people and like jumps into a bush. I'm very excited.
That's what this universe is about.
It really
Jumping
is.
from bushes and slashing people.
Yep.